Ta-da! We're back again. It's good to see everybody here at the Donald Kent Art YouTube. Great to have you here today. We're going to be looking at some really cool artwork. If you are new to my channel or new to the white positive sphere, the so-called alt-right, etc., then you would know the meme artist named Waveguy. So Waveguy is a really cool digital artist, does synthwave, fashwave style art. And today we have with me one of my good friends and a very, very special guest back on the channel again. I'd like to welcome Dee Morehouse with me. How are you doing today, sir?
Good. How are you?
Awesome sauce. Yeah, very good. I'm so glad that we're here. This is, just for me to tell everybody, you've been on my channel before for the Francis Parker Yockey discussion. Tell us a little bit about your connection with Francis Parker Yockey.
Sure. So I'm one of the younger researchers looking into Yockey. He's obviously got a mass appeal with younger members of the white nationalist movement. And I think he's even had some sort of a foray into a little more, lefty spheres as well. Obviously, Kerry Bolton is the big dog on procuring original Yockey materials, but I would like to think of myself as someone who's up and coming. I've just been really tied up on doing research and life stuff. Wrote some older articles about Yockey, but then realized that I really had to pump the brakes and kind of refine my work. But there's definitely some stuff I'd like to release later this year. But, I'd like to say thank you for having me on.
Yeah.
It's always an honor. And I really appreciate being in the special thanks here on your recent book.
And there's the segue right there. So on screen, you can see my recent book, IMPERIUM Calling, The Art and Poetry of Donald Kent. The link is in the show notes, the link to Amazon where you can pick it up. I've gotten some really lovely comments and reviews from some fairly big names in our movement. And I haven't been pushing the marketing so much on this. I guess I'm too modest. I need to be more bold about that. But I'm very happy that you purchased it. If you maybe want to say a few words, let people know what you think of the book.
Sure. Yeah. So for one, I think that one of the major upsides of it is that there's not a bunch of fluff, which is common with, self-promoting authors, especially in small enclaves of political movements. You usually get a lot of fluff or work that's not very refined. But what's cool about this book is you're getting actually a couple of issues, like full-length issues of comics from different genres that you've written. So you have the Seraph for I'm forgetting the publishing house that does that, and then you have Militiaman, and you have Dynamite
Thor,
and Dynamite Thor, stuff like that, and then some poetry at the beginning. So it's kind of like a progression of your career, and then you can actually see a few moments where I think they're the highlights of your career technically,
for sure.
And that's all throughout your development and all throughout the book as well.
So there's essentially four, I don't want to call them chapters, but four sections where you have the poetry after the sort of the intro, and then you've got fine art, graphic design, illustration, and then comics. So because I do a pretty broad range of artwork, and I wanted to represent, a lot of work that I've done for people in the movement, sort of showing how I've had this wonderful experience in the last 7 years or so of meeting and working with all these wonderful different influencers. And then also some of my private work. Most of it is, fine art related, I guess, or rather that it's related to the theme of Donald Kent and what I do here. I'd say the fine art for me, especially, I'm proud of because I'm representing some of my concepts, like the sort of conceptual art you see on the cover. But then also I get to show people older work that I've done that has really never been seen, and it's still a part of the artist that I am, you know. So, and then when you go into the illustration, you're kind of looking at the bizarre archives and all this other kind of fun and cool stuff, so even some graphic design. So there's it's just a really, I feel like a smorgasbord, like a buffet, you know, of different types of art. And then each chapter has a little intro page where there's just some text to try to describe, like, what's the political context, what's the cultural, sociological context of this art. So it's an important thing. And anyway, I appreciate very much that you got that. And so why don't we jump over and start looking at Waveguy? And what I'm going to do first is do a little screen share of an article that he was in, or rather his artwork was in. This article is from 2018, which to me feels like yesterday, but like in internet time, it's like, you know, ages ago in 2018, this article was, this is Fashwave. Now, first of all, Mike or Mick, MIC magazine. Here's a funny little side story. I was actually interviewed by them, or a guy in that company, in relation to some other project and event that was going on in around 2017. And they, you know, spent all this time on the phone asking me all these questions, and then they didn't use anything that I said. So it was like completely edited out of the article, and like the main guy got like the full article. But what I noticed though, and I don't want to say who that article was about, because there's just certain political associations that over time you realize, like, you know, maybe I don't want to be associated with that one thing for whatever reason. Anyway, long story short is that this is a liberal rag, and you know, they'll ask you questions and you tell them the truth, and then they'll cherry pick things you said, put it out of context, and then reinterpret it and add, like, I guess, lots of fluff, but it's like Marxist fluff, you know, that basically it's you know, like I say, it's a liberal rag, you know. So after that experience, I was so kind of shocked at how um, just how bold and blatantly they lie. You know, how they come at you like, hey, you know, well, we're going to write an article about this cool thing you're involved in, and then later you see like they just, you know, verbally destroy you. And anyway, it's a joke. So I just wanted to kind of go through here. So this is some of his Waveguy's work up here in the corner. Protect your heritage. We'll look at that a little bit later. The way it's set up is you'll have a kind of a guy who writes the article, and he'll have a quote unquote expert there to talk about it, you know, and the expert happens to be a Jewish woman. Well, who better to tell us about vaporwave and fashwave than a Jewish woman? So you can completely fill in the blanks, like the obfuscation, the interpreting things that don't exist, the demoralization, all this kind of stuff that is just, I don't know. People look to art critics and they just like, oh, okay, whatever you say, you're the expert, therefore you know, and I will adopt your opinion. I will adopt your interpretation of X, Y, Z. So we're gonna take it back today. We're gonna look at Waveguy's work, and we're going to kind of take it back a bit here. So just looking through some of the things here, I wanted to make an interesting, or point something out that I think is interesting, is that she's the article is mentioning a nostalgia fix of vaporwave becomes a spiritual release from the dizzying rate of change caused by new products and apps in the near instant ubiquity of smartphones. Such a societal discomfort was predicted by none other than Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto. Well, who to think of it? You know, like that somehow she has to weave Karl Marx into this article as if like that's the good guy, you know, and that's the guy that knows everything about art. And so she goes on to sort of talk and quote Karl Marx saying that, like, the populace will be kind of demoralized and drained from capitalism, and how capitalism will make us soulless in some way. So she uses that to say vaporwave and fashwave both play in the ruins of modern consumerism. Okay. I mean, there's, like, for example, previously we saw this, like computers and products and, whatever. Okay. So there's a general statement, but she's trying to tie it into, this Marxist idea of anti-capitalism. And the topic of anti-capitalism is just a whole other, we're not going to go down that road. That there's something to say about that. But getting back to what she's doing here, both genres force us to consider how much we have lost and how so quickly. So what she's trying to do essentially is to create this idea that people in the far right, dissident right, white nationalist culture, that we have this fantasy that, we're so lonely and we're so lost, and, capitalism has just hurt us so badly that we are kind of going into the fantasy world of this older time, to try as if there's something wrong with remembering tradition, as if there's something wrong with reconnecting to your myths, your heroes, your heritage. So, like, this poster of Identity Europa, protect your heritage, and this kind of art activism where you're putting images like this out in public, etc. So she goes on, historian of fascist propaganda and aesthetics, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, I think that's how it's pronounced, which is clearly a Jewish name, writes in Fascist Modernities, which is apparently her book, that both Mussolini and Hitler looked back at the art of ancient civilization to draw on their symbols. They offered marble bodies as a vision of rehabilitated masculinity to a society devastated by a post-war crisis of confidence. So there you go. That's kind of it in a nutshell. She's framing, rehabilitating masculinity as if somehow we are weak, and we're like kind of doing. So it's very strange. It's kind of like saying, okay, here's medicine, but it's somehow is going to hurt you, so don't take it. It's just the dark, twisted lens that she's casting over our culture and our art. She goes on to talk about, I don't want to go like too deep into the article. I can post the article if anyone can tolerate reading it. It is, again, it's mostly just, Marxist propaganda. But ending off the article on this meme, which I think we all know, this is a pretty famous, I shouldn't call it meme, this is artwork here. Homesick for a place I'm not sure even existed. There is a sadness or a melancholy to modernity. And from our perspective, that kind of melancholy is something that we have to change. It's like, this is a problem that needs to be fixed. We need to find a home. We should not be homesick, for the past or something. We have to reconnect to it. Well, let's revitalize ourselves. Let's know who we are and become who we are, as it were, right? So that's the kind of the shadow or the shade that she's throwing on us, is that we're all sort of weak, and that this is just some kind of like lame fantasy. So I wanted to first off kind of get your response a little bit, Dee, to what I was just saying about the article.
Yeah, it's really creepy, the kind of boilerplate language that you can recognize, but that a lot of normies don't. And you have to wonder, like, really who these types of articles are aimed at, because you hear it all the time. It's the usual Apple notification news story type speak, where it's like, there's Nazis in America and they want to kill you. Here's what you have to do. Like, here's the truth. They use that whole, like, here's
Yeah.
what you need to know.
Yeah. Here's what you need to know. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's the sitch. And I almost wonder, like, if that phrasing, I think it's purposefully gaslighting and crazy making.
There you go.
I mean, it's inherently, it's, I hate to use the word because this term has become so popularized by pop psychology today, which is dominated obviously by Jews, and they
Mm-hmm.
love to point the finger and call everybody else narcissistic. But like, frankly, that is very much NPD behavior.
Right.
But for as much as I don't know what like the cardinal way to describe that language is, it's very like Hollywood villain monologue of like,
Yeah.
you know, you're clinging to your values, like you should just give in, and
Yeah. There you go. There you go. So, but you figure her audience are the people that have given in. They're, the soy boys and the feminists and such that despise masculinity, that despise Western civilization, gender roles, or all the horse shit that they're constantly talking about. There's one of the things that she says here over this image. She's saying the trouble is, with all fascist fantasies of the past, is that this gilded history of white supremacy presented in fast wave art by altered images of ancient Greco-Roman sculpture is an illusion. And this thing of just like, I'm just going to say this thing, but I'm not going to back it up with any reason, logic, evidence. But just because I have the authority of being the art critique and I'm Jewish and therefore you should, kiss my feet and tell me I'm right and etc. Like that's part of the leftist package, is that you're not supposed to think for yourself. You're supposed to just do what they tell you. You don't need reasons. You just have your emotions. And so it's on the one hand, I think she's indulging in the fantasy that we are not powerful, that we do not exist, that we are not a threat to Jewish hegemony. You see where I'm going with it? So, because this is kind of how that mind works, is that everything is literally the opposite of the truth. We live in Jewish supremacy. Who rules the world? Who owns the governments? Who starts the wars? Who owns the banks? I could go on, right? So is that not supremacy? You see, and then like to reframe our art history as quote, right, what the term white supremacy itself is a total fallacy. Okay, who would go to China today and say, you know what, you guys have to change your Chinese supremacy. This is really unacceptable. Or who would go to, I just pick any country in the world, and it's just another psyop of linguistics. It's another dialectic to, it's like the word racist. It's meant to silence whites, and sadly, a lot of people they fall for this shit. If anything, you could describe white supremacy as the inability for non-whites to excel in our societies. That's not entirely true. You have Asians with high IQs that excel great, right? But even that is muddy to get into that whole thing. But I feel as if, like, whenever I'm in a discussion or debate about this particular topic, I destroy it by saying, whites have standards, very high standards that are normal to us, and we are entitled to our own civilization and all its benefits. And so if you come here and you cannot, or even if you're born here and you cannot sort of excel in our world, then that's, in a meritocracy, we can simply say, like, you can't make it, and there's an IQ difference here. There's something wrong, So, but to blame us for that as if like we're bad, it's insane to me. I can't see how people can't see through this stuff. I think primarily because it's threatening. It's a very, very scary word. White supremacy, like, oh my God, this is like, we've got a Nazi under every stone, behind every bush. So I don't know. What are your impressions about that?
Yeah, when you said the word threatening, I would say that there's a lot of like dog whistles in these kinds of articles, because I think that there's an element of trying to intimidate people who are thinking about creating art like this, because this kind of I mean, this zine or whatever it is nowhere near on the level of the New Yorker in terms of prestige, but it uses the same tactics of like targeting a very small cosmopolitan or kind of like wannabe bohemian group of people that are the type of characters who would dox you. But it's not, I mean, it's sort of the same issue of like who's really watching daytime CNN coverage, but they're targeting a very, they know that we look at it or that we find it, and they know that those people find it. So for as much as I want to like break it down, break all the arguments down, I do think that there's a little bit of this like gaslight your opponent, get your opponent to explain themselves, make them feel nervous, like, you know, don't create the art, don't speak up.
Right, as if we have to apologize somehow, you know, like this is one of my sort of debate strategies, is that I don't feel a need to, how do I put this? People will attack you, and then by virtue of them attacking you, it gives you this instinct that like, well, I should explain myself, and therefore I'm off the hook, and I won't be attacked, you know. But when you're being attacked by a crazy imbecile who is, you know, a Marxist, Antifa person, then you don't need to give them the respect. You see where I'm going with this? It's like it's like a dog barking at you. There's nothing you can say that's going to stop it. It's just that's kind of what their nature is, in a sense. So there's another part of the article here that is really horrible. She goes on to essentially say, I'll just read it because it's just too unbelievable. So she goes, which is why Vaporwave is set up perfectly for a right-wing heist, just as the far right has stolen leftist youth culture for decades, from Hitler to heavy metal. Where, I mean, what? You know, like right wing. She's saying here that the far right has stolen leftist youth culture. What? Like, when did the left like Hitler? When did the left like heavy metal? I don't, you know.
Right.
I'm like, huh? I mean, that's on its face doesn't make sense, right? So, where Marx predicted that dissatisfaction with capitalism would set up a revolution against the rich, Fashwave instead proposes that Western civilization has already fallen, and the only way forward is to return to white supremacy and traditionalist dogma. Where Vaporwave reflects a crisis of capitalism, Fashwave sees absolute apocalypse. So, I know, before I comment on that, do you want to jump in?
Well, I mean, for one, Vaporwave is cool and it appeals to people because there's such a thing as aesthetic realism, which is what Jews and Marxists have to inherently deny because they're fundamentally ugly people with ugly ways of thinking. And so, I mean, you would have to come up with these weird, like backward ontological arguments in order to deny beauty. So, I mean, that's one thing I'm thinking about. But for as much as they try to rationalize, you know, why other people disagree with them, I think the fact that the normie world is hungry to even just go back, you know, rewind the clocks 10, 20, 30 years to Y2K aesthetics, or what's, you know, become called like fruitager era. You're seeing a lot of this cropping up in, you know, normie Instagram, normie YouTube video essays and whatnot. And I think that trying to psychologize the alt-right is laid bare by that fact. You know, people are hungry for something that isn't vapid bullshit, to be honest. You know?
Jewish demoralization, you know, which is all of Netflix, Hollywood, and, you know, TV commercials and on and on. I've always been fascinated with it's sort of the love of the 80s, like an 80s aesthetic that you see in the synthwave kind of aesthetic, the music. I think, you know, this longing for the past is not a negative thing. And then on another element, there's all art, all music is kind of, has a nostalgic to it, or has like an escapism to it or something. It's part of what art does in society and in a culture. It inspires you. So I don't feel like an escapism. I feel more like a celebration of our culture when we look at these memes and listen to this kind of music. Does that make sense? Do you feel that's a fair comment?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think I can't remember what philosopher said this. I'm not going to try to pretend like I'm that sophisticated, but someone said,
Mhm.
you know, worldviews tend to choose different respective worldviews will either venerate the past and, in a sense, be ruled by the past and what can be possible in the future, or
Mm.
they will be hubristic and deny the past.
Mhm.
And so I think that fascism venerates the past and
Hugely, hugely.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So if you wanted to kill your enemies without bullets, you would try to cut them off from their past. You would kill their spirit. You would kill their knowledge of who they are. You would kill their sense of family and like existential connection to their ancestors. So that plays into this whole like the strategy of the left. The one thing she says here, where she's saying Fashwave instead proposes that Western civilization is already fallen, and the only way forward is to return to white supremacy and traditionalist dogma. So we do have like the West has fallen, like in our dialectic and such, but I think there is a black pill side to that, certainly 50% of it, but the other half of it means this is a call to arms. This is a call to war. This is a call to do something. Like we're in the 11th hour here. The urgency could not get any stronger. So again, it's how do you, if you're outside our culture and you hate it, you're gonna make these types of statements and interpretations because you want us to perish, right? From inside the movement, when this is our culture and we can truly represent our own culture. You don't, like, for example, the swastika is an ancient symbol, but so like the Jews don't get to tell us what our symbols mean. Like if we tell the Jews, okay, the Star of David is a hate symbol, blah, that'll now you're in trouble. Now you're going to jail, or you're going to get a fine, or there's some kind of blah blah blah, all this kind of stuff. So this is what I'm saying, is that the way that we talk about art has a lot to do with how people perceive themselves. It's part of the culture war. Let's just kind of put it plainly and simply. And then, like, return to traditionalist dogma. Okay, says who, for starters? Like, I mean, I would imagine that there are people that are very dogmatic in the far right. I know certainly there are, but there's also this sense of, how do I say, like, the more traditionalist we are, the stronger we are. You see, it putting dogma after traditionalist turns traditionalist into a dirty word. You see what I'm talking about? So it's the contextual frame that is being skewed here, as if like there's something wrong with being traditionalist. Where vaporwave reflects a crisis of capitalism. Does vaporwave reflect a crisis of capitalism? That to me is just like art critic blather. You know what I mean? Like, and that, they just say something and therefore it's true. Fashwave sees absolute apocalypse, so that's not true. It might be the apocalypse of our enemies, right? I mean, have you watched a Fashwave video of music? It's you just go do that and you'll understand what I'm saying. But so before we move on to Waveguy's art, is there anything more you want to add to that?
I mean, there's so many ways that you could take it. I think younger generations, Gen Y and Gen Z, have a lot of nostalgia
Hmm.
for that time period because either they didn't really live through it as adults, so there is something idyllic, but I don't think it's completely misplaced. Um, and there's a couple of video essays on YouTube, some of which were done by Marxists, and some of which were from more right wing guys, but they speak about how there was so much promise in the 80s and the 90s, and the people who kind of lived off the scraps of that
Mm.
period recognized the optimism. I think it would be so fascinating to write a book about like a breakdown of the pop culture from that era through our perspective. I know someone who's actually trying to do something like this is Jefferson Lee. He's going to
Great.
release a book about I don't know what kind of rock. See, I'm a total luddite when it comes to rock history, but like he's not really covering the National Socialist black metal stuff, but he's covering like the Pantera and Phil Anselmo type.
Okay.
He's super into that stuff, so like
Hmm.
it would be interesting to maybe you and I can do some streams on like breaking down the aesthetic.
Jefferson's a good friend for starters. So like I've done a lot of freelance work for him. We're buds basically. So like I think it'd be really neat if the three of us could get on and look at what he's writing. I'm also a musician, the whole thing. Like he and I have like a kind of a running joke about like who's better, Black Sabbath or Led Zeppelin, and he's in the Sabbath camp, I'm in the Zeppelin camp, and so we kind of go, it's like a just cool. So like I'd be so into this. I think this would be a really fun discussion. Maybe even bring in some more musicians on it as well.
Yeah, and because I kind of got sidetracked there, but that's something that I think would be awesome and like really worthwhile because it's not just rehashing the same kind of analyses that we're used to from right-wing authors. But I don't think it was necessarily an empty nostalgia that we have, because I think media, well, for one, the economy was doing much better at the time, so I don't think it was just a capitalist trick per se.
Yeah.
Even though rampant one-way free trade has definitely robbed us of our inheritance. If you go back and look at media from the 90s and the 80s, there's so much more portrayal of people in their 20s having families.
Oh God.
And settling down, and like the genre of comedy and romance.
Sure.
There's so much more of that, and
men were masculine. You didn't have them like this kind of like seething simps that are just like it's just everywhere around us now. Like men are completely different. You have the sort of Rambo versus like a whiny Spider-Man or something like this. But
right. Yeah, and so I think it speaks to people my age.
Small thing I wanted to add to the topic of economics is just, you didn't have the inflation in the 80s. Houses and cars and education didn't cost what they cost now. And I don't think people were so much into debt slavery the way that they are now. So like that, all this bullshit about, capitalism is wearing down the far right or whatever. Like, where the hell do you get that from? Like, I get in the sense of like, the economy is getting worse, but the point being is that we want a better economy. We want more freedom, so that it's wearing us down. It's actually making us more angry, which is heating us up. You get where I'm going with it. So that's sort of like different sides of the spectrum of an idea here. But let me jump in as well. One of my people in the chat here, my lady here, her name's she's saying, it's as if Goodwin's law replaced every semblance of discourse online. Everything and everyone I don't like is a Nazi. I fondly remember when we could all agree to disagree, lost the ability around 2020. This is a really nice point, adding to that. And then we have Trad Dad, who's made an interesting comment. The current ideological zeitgeist demoralizes white youth. Focus on your kids to keep them from falling for it. So there you go. Like this article is people falling for it. It's used this type of language, type of framing. So that's more the right wing thinking that I'm talking about here, is that, yeah, there's bad things. We recognize them, but we're not like like drowning in our tears. We're not going away because of it. But I'm sorry, did I cut you off, Dee? Did you have more you wanted to add?
I mean, I was just going to add that if you look at the protagonists, or just in general, like the main casts of movies from that time period, and what's become very popular in the like Fash Wave and Y2K aesthetics, or what the span from the 80s to the aughts, is the main characters were people who were our age. So I think that's kind of why we resonate with it to some extent, but it also reflects the investment that was being made by media companies in the next generation, assuming like we're planting this idea that you will have a future.
Yeah.
And there was a forward thinking element to that style, and the type of stuff that was really being marketed at youth at the time.
Yeah.
In terms of electronic entertainment was like, I remember Ace Combat and going into the arcade and all these different games about, you're going to be a pilot when you grow up and you're going to go to space or be some sort of a hero. And even if it had it kind of like a muted tone to it, or was more of a sleeper, the media was domestic and it focused on kind of more domestic issues. But nowadays it's just kind of, that would be an interesting breakdown to try and figure out like what are the palettes that they're coloring with in modern art.
So just a quick comment on that, like, the Right Stuff, Tom Cruise, the Rambo stuff, there was a very strong nationalist theme, obviously some kind of level of military as well, before, like, Roger Stone, I forget his name, something Stone, Oliver Stone made his films, and then like the big Vietnam guilt trip movie trend that came out.
Oh,
and then
that's Born on the 4th of July.
Born on the 4th of July. There's some good films out there, but do you see the difference in the tone? It's as if like, okay, nationalism's bad, blah blah blah, and look at all the horrible things we did and went through. We did go through those things. Wars are bad. I am not at all for wars. All wars are banker wars, so I'm not like equating war with nationalism. And I know that in some ideological way that like early fascists had that idea, like war is life, kind of, the sort of Mussolini versus Giovanni Gentile, in terms of like how they look at fascism. But we know better. We know who the bankers and who runs both sides, the Henry Kissingers of the world, and how all of that works. Anyway, so why don't we jump right in here? So Waveguy, that was a heck of an introduction. That took a lot longer than I thought it might, but I think it at least made a really good context for looking through his work. I would say the audience is probably really well warmed up now in terms of like art critique and the like. So here's one of his pieces. Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened. So in the synthwave, fashwave meme art world, there's the common thing that you see is, you have like a Greco-Roman statue, a bunch of filters, a couple fancy techniques, and maybe some text, and next. And that is just rehashed and rehashed and rehashed. And I'm not saying that it's bad. I like it. I like the aesthetic of it. But the challenge is for artists in this sphere is to not make it hackneyed, is to not, is to like riff off of that, is to break away from the norm, so to speak here. So this, I think, is like an extremely playful piece. And here it's quite interesting with the themes of like, this Etch-a-Sketch toy, which is kind of like really quite an old game. I don't know when that first came out, probably in the 1960s or something, 70s or something. And then the statue, and then the way that the two elements come together with the face. It's playful and almost and like probably childlike to an extent. So, and then of course, just the overall palette with like the colors, whatnot, are, fairly bright and kind of popping and whatnot. What's your interpretation of this piece, D?
Mm, I don't really have a deep interpretation of it, but I know that the whole Statue of David um, and Apollo meme, it's so widespread at this point. But I think part of the strength of Waveguys, he really should be given so much more credit for these memes that have gone mainstream at this point,
Yeah.
um, because there's like a simplicity in the communication and in something that's like a little bit ironic, because there's always going to be irony in mixing the present and the past. Something as serious as the brilliance of technical sculpture. Um, Something that's ironic can kind of like fly under the radar, and I think that's why he succeeded with works like this, is because even if it's explicitly fascist, you kind of can't call it fascist because it's it's kind of like a joke in a way.
Right. Yeah. That's the other thing, is that our humor, it goes over a lot of people's heads. So that's a whole other thing. Well, let's move on. Let's look at some other works here. This piece is very, very unique in terms of the context of the kind of meme art from the far right. Now, I forgot to read something. I asked Waveguy before I set up this show, is there anything, like, first of all, would you like to come on the show? And then, no, blah, blah, blah. But here's some statements that you can read. So I'm going to read a little bit as you look at this art. This is comments from Waveguy about this show. He's saying, maybe talk just a bit of history of why I use the term art right. And, there's other people, meme artists like Flash Gorgon, who's a French meme artist, super close friend of mine. He's associated with the White Art Collective as well. He uses art right quite a lot as well. So he's part of that culture. Anyway, why use the term art right? It was an art group that branched off from normal Fash Wave, and we wanted, or tried at least, to promote right-wing art in the best way we could. Basically, attempted good optics. Then after a while, we just stopped caring. We even had a logo we would put in our pictures, still have it, but never use it anymore. After the group that made the movement left it. So I'm trying to think of interesting bits of info. Maybe the man who taught me how to use Photoshop while I was in the movement, we knew him as Bromega. The man was a legend. Even Rotostein feared him. Haha. The other, these obviously are artists. It might be very underground to some people. Let me get back here. Maybe the man, I read that. The other artists worth mentioning who make some of the more known Fash Wave images out there would be King Goy, Ramen, Eternal Reich. Jurius can confirm this info. Jurius, of course, is the great musician in our sphere. Is like one of the top, I'd say the top synthwave, musician out there. We can confirm this. Let's see, info. We tried to get him on board when we just started off the art. He says the Discord was wild back then. See, I remember there was a big Discord crash where it was like, oh, the feds have infiltrated Discord. And then everybody was like, don't go on Discord. Do you remember that, D?
Vaguely.
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago. It was probably back around this time, 2018-ish. So Discord was wild back then. It's probably what Telegram is today, or something. I don't know, or maybe 4chan. I don't know. I wasn't on Discord at the time. Then came the purges. Loads of users and servers got a massive hit from Zog, but that's when I made a Twitter and continued the art. But after a while, they suspended my account, and then came the PayPal blacklist. According to PayPal, my art was seen as, quote, high risk activity and then banned off Pinterest. So this guy has seen some shit. Like he's the system has shit on him, Like it on the one hand, attests to the power of this art. Okay, that it's challenging enough to the system that they're shutting him down so much. So you got to give some credit there, right? These aren't just pictures. They're memetics, right? There's a kind of a meme magic at play here. I swear my name is in a database somewhere. Haha. This might sound bizarre, but even NATO tried to claim we stole their tactics in a few articles, and then he shared some articles with me. I had to look at them. Stopracism.ca, alt-right using leaked NATO psychological warfare tactics spread white supremacy globally. There's an article for you right there. That's a mouthful right there. Going on, we just laughed and like we just laughed at that, and then made a few pieces to piss them off. Where we mention art in a video and a piece. So he goes on with some other things. And so I showed you that article just now. Then lastly, he says, if you can't get around to covering much of this, just mention Art Right being created by Bromega, who taught me how to use Photoshop, and Raman, KG, and Eternal Reich being part of the group. That's the important part I would like to be mentioned. So, and then I'm adding to that Flash Gorgon, because he's still cooking. And do you want to make any commentary on this piece or any interpretive things? That it's probably one of the most challenging pieces. That there's some text in here that is spread out. You can kind of see it across the top. Essentially, it says self-preserve. Down at the bottom, there's some text here, and for me, it looks kind of like a sort of a game that isn't, like, all the pieces aren't completely there. It's sort of like a flat Rubik's Cube with some Jeopardy words or something. I don't know. What's your take on this piece?
I think, yeah, I mean, it reminds me a little bit more of ROM era art, and I think it's kind of like the past seeping through to the present.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's broken up, it seems like it has more integrity than some of the other statues. And I say that like purposefully having more integrity as a subject. It's not being defaced. It's like,
right.
It's masked, but it's still coming through.
Right. There's I think it's fair enough to say that there's a certain theme of putting the pieces back together, and coming back to our roots, becoming who we are, this kind of thing. So I like how that works. I feel like artists have to take chances too. Like sometimes you're going to make a work of art that's kind of challenging for the viewer, and that shouldn't limit you. And I feel like this piece is a little more on the challenging side. So this piece, I think, is just more lovely, and I feel like this kind of art needs a little representation. Down at the bottom that says Art Right. I don't really know what types of filters or effects he applied to this, but I guess what I find interesting is the merging of modern technology with the ancient sculpture. I think that's that is probably the core aspect of like Fash Wave or Vaporwave. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more of an exploration of the technique, but one thing that always struck me about this older, somewhat dramatic, appearing art is the portrayal of.
Sorry, I'll get back.
Oh, no worries. Humanoid figures as more angelic, men and women as angelic. And I think it says something about the potential that our form of social order sees in relationships, contrary to what others find. Can go on forever about that, but it strikes me as relating to that.
So there's something painterly about this. There's, you've got, the cubism it comes to mind, but also just the sophistication of the color. There's some really beautiful things happening in which color is overlapping and creating more sophisticated relationships of color. So there's really a level of aesthetics here that's quite beautiful if you give it some time, you know. So let's look at some other stuff here. This to me, I feel again is more playful. I think he's a pretty playful creator in a way here, you know. And once again, the use of the Art Right logo down here on the side, on the right side there. Um, what's your first impression as you see this piece?
I think it's a little more lighthearted
Mm-hmm.
than the others.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I believe that's the biblical God, and I think there's a little bit. Yeah, I don't really have any like deep breakdown other than the fact that these ideas that are regarded as traditional could be imported to
Sure.
modern design.
Right. There's how do we say, the fact that it's the creator creating in the act of creating, and the way that he's used those kind of neon circles at where his fingertips are, the way that he used the triangle as a window for the god to kind of emerge out of, you know, the use of space in the sky behind him, whereas in the sky and around him are clouds, so the sort of day and night. Again, with art, the more you give it, the more you get back. You know, it's sometimes we look at things and we can just say like, okay, it's a guy in a triangle and some clouds, you know, like you can say that, or you can interpret art, you know, you can do art critique, and that's giving yourself to the art. So it's just the more you look at it, I think the more fun it is. And that's an odd thing to say, like this is a fun piece of art, you know, that these simplistic, not childish, childlike shapes and the way that they're worked together, it almost makes it mechanical in a strange way. But on the other hand, it's the idea of like man imposing math and architecture on the world. And, you know, maybe that's kind of what God is in some sense, that God brings order to the world and by through creating man or something. You see where I'm going with this idea, you know?
Right.
So again, the more you give something, the more you get back from it. So save the West, saving as if it's, you know, loading or something. Please do not turn off the console. So let's zoom in quite a bit more. The more you get in there, the more abstract this becomes, which I find fascinating. You look at it more like, you know, dashes and dots, kind of, you know, zeros and ones. You know, it loses the kind of human element and becomes computer generated. But then when you pull back and you see the whole thing together, it's got a fun quality, and it plays right into that vaporwave aesthetic. You can almost hear music to this, like, you know, Carpenter Brooder. I don't know. Maybe that's too fashy, but like something that's fun, kind of 80s Tron like vaporwave music. Maybe some Jurius, you know.
Yeah, it's definitely nodding to kind of what we were talking about earlier with
Hmm.
my generation being consumed with retro video games
Mm-hmm.
and the desire to go back to those memories. But I really like this piece. It's one of my favorite because you can see the full render. It's just kind of de-resed,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's not necessarily trying pastiche. But then there's also something that isn't entirely realist in that it's
Mm-hmm.
showing. It's supposed to be like a video game screen. That's obvious. I'm kind of being redundant here, but you get the point.
Yeah, yeah. I like this going back, this love of like nostalgia and going back, because we have to go back. We know that, and I mean, on the other hand, it's like, okay, you can't go back to the past, but with no past, where the hell's your future? What direction do you have? You know, and I do think there's something very healthy and positive about a certain kind of nostalgia where you take pleasure and joy in the things that made you happy. You know, when you were more pure, you lived in a more pure world. And these are the things that we desire. God, family, and nation are the three pillars of fascism. They're This is what nationalism is. This is what we are about. God, family, and nation. Only a Marxist communist would try to make those three words somehow seem bad or evil, you know. And it's, in a sense, it's kind of like the continuity of nature and mankind, you know. And there's something very profound about these three things here. So I don't know. I feel like this nostalgia is actually helping us to reconnect to our past, and then through the arts, refreshing it for today. You know, so it's this is very exciting to me in this regard, and it kind of makes me more angry at the article that I read to you guys earlier. You know, but and anyone in the chat, please comment, ask questions if you want to add thoughts to this. If we said something that you feel needs more contextualizing or explaining, anything, you know, I love interaction on the show. So please, and then if you're watching this later, please leave comments below. We would certainly engage in some more conversation. So once again, like, this breaks through that. I don't want to call it a tradition, but like the way that most fast wave, or rather synth wave art is a picture of a statue with some filter. You know, this takes it to another level. It's adding more of that kind of retro video game quality, which is really fun. The way that the text is in the foreground, the the figure, the face there is in the middle ground. Of course, the framing of the red triangle is being echoed over here in the Art Right logo, which is really good connection there. The use of red in the text, protect your heritage. It's all really nicely balanced. And then this cool dark blue cityscape in the background. You can almost hear the theme to Miami Vice right now. You know, how do you like this piece?
It's one of my favorites again because it's not trying to do a collage
Mhm.
necessarily. Not to say that there aren't, well done collages, but it's, from a graphic design standpoint, very well executed,
Mm,
with the border that's also pixelated, or
mm.
whatever the proper term is,
Yeah, yeah.
and it is very pulp noir 80s.
Marvelous. Yeah. That's perfectly said. There you go. So let's zoom in a bit on this. Um, as an art teacher, I'm always compelled to talk about elements and principles of art. So this piece is like, you know, really speaks to that. So for starters, up here in the corner, the Art Right logo using a circle, a rectangle, and a triangle, and then red, yellow, blue. These are primary colors, primary shapes, very basic stuff that you would teach children, you know. And the way that that's used, it again, it implies the simplicity and the purity of mind coming from the artist, and it being imbued into the art. The use of the green, I think, is really bold. It's quite interesting. The main thing that's happening here is contrast. So you have in the foreground this bold green monochromatic figure, right? And it's, you know, it's a photograph, it's a sculpture. But then in the background, and even a bit behind the text here, we see a lot of abstraction. We see a lot of movement. We kind of the slashing paintbrush. We see almost what looks like collage, where, you know, you would do some abstract textures on a piece of paper and then cut that out with a pair of scissors, and then, you know, collage it together with glue. So it almost has like an elementary school art project quality to it here. But and what's really subtle is the black triangle in the back here. You have to be colorblind in a color world, in clown world. Sorry. So then the message is really heavy. That is a very, very, you know, you're not supposed to talk about race. You're supposed to be colorblind. And then the term clown world obviously being our description of living in leftist dystopia, living in the New World Order, living in the age of white genocide. Now, this is clown world. You know, we're that I could go on and on. We all know what it is. But let me hand the mic back to you, D. What are your impressions?
Yeah, there's also that um, he's also kind of laying the principle out literally in the sense that it's so aggressive with the colors, but then it's saying
Yeah,
you have to be colorblind,
yeah,
kind of like deny what's right in front of your face.
exactly.
But, but
There's
yeah,
a
this is yeah.
there's a sense of humor, I think, in his work. Would you agree?
Yeah, and it's lighthearted, even though it's disgusting and
Well,
extremely
right,
dark
right.
subject.
In the themes that we're dealing with in our lives are very, very heavy. You know, human trafficking. You know, mass unstoppable immigration. Oh, I could go on. You know, we're living in clown world. It's a very ugly time. So to have this type of like playfulness, it's there's a type of rebellion going on here, but it's very clever. It's very understated, is
Hmm.
what I would say to that. So, yeah, another thing?
Oh, I was going to say the text as well. Like this is so important in selling a message or selling your art is
Mhm.
like playing around with the text
The
and
typography, yeah.
yeah, typography and graphic design in terms of like what colors you want on the background
Mhm. The type of
and
fonts,
yeah,
etcetera.
rule of thirds and stuff like that. This I think executes it better than a lot of
Right, right, right.
stuff.
Nicely done. Alright, let's, move on to another piece. Now, this is quite a bit more sophisticated. Again, cubism and futurism comes to mind a bit with that kind of almost Mondrian has like a almost like a Mondrian pattern within the central part. You can see it's obviously like an outline of the figure in the middle, but then with this kind of like geometric abstraction over it. This is a really interesting kind of on a I guess it's a little more graphic designy than fine art, if you will. I don't know if that's well said, but it's a a bold piece, a powerful piece. Very interesting symmetry, the use of the negative space with the black here. I just noticed down in the bottom here is a kind of it's hard to get the screen to work with me here, but what looks like a video cursor that is gone and the video and you're watching like a YouTube video. That's kind of interesting. Glory follows virtue like it were its shadow. The art right. So I'm really curious. That sounds like a quote from somebody I should know. You know, have you heard that before?
No, I haven't.
Mm. So the topic of virtue, this kind of like I can't quite tell what type of character is this, like a warrior, a slave, a philosopher. It's and it's tough to you know to determine that. I'd have to research who that is. That would definitely bring more context and depth to interpreting the piece. You know,
Yeah,
um,
I think it might be a Greek boxer.
but if you look at his hands, you can see they're all kind of wrapped up. So he does kind of seem like a warrior, boxer, athlete type character. Um, it's a curious piece. Of course the use of like glory, the concept of glory and virtue. Now, earlier we were looking at that Jewish leftist article that was trying to demean and demoralize Fashwave, Vaporwave, and that's saying like traditionalism is somehow a kind of dogma. You know, it's like like these type of things. Whereas what we're really talking about are things like glory and virtue. So I don't know. I'll hand the mic to you. What are your impressions of this piece?
At first, it's funny because I was looking at it almost like an abstract piece because of the whitescape in the background,
Right.
and then you have the numbers at the top
Hmm.
left, which
Yeah.
is kind of like a popular motif and abstract
Right. There's more
art.
over here. There's more over here as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like an in draft thing, or it's like product number. Yeah, that was very
Right.
popular for a while. Was like,
Right. Right.
clothing with the
Mm-hmm.
almost like military or industrial
Mm-hmm.
SKUs on it,
Mm-hmm.
which I actually like. I'm not totally against abstract art, but it's clear that he's nodding a little bit more to it's kind of like a video scrubber in the bottom left. So I kind of wonder if the numbers are a nod to like timestamps.
Interesting.
And the white in the background looks like the noise, like
But
fuzzy.
like, right, the white noise that you'd see on a TV set or something, right? That's
Hmm.
an excellent connection there. It's very,
Yeah. And I think one of the nice touches of this is over his shoulder, there's this like, I don't know what you call that, but it's sort of like a decay of digital
yes. It
cassettes.
almost looks like there's like something wrong with the image. There was like a glitch in Photoshop or something right about there, and it just adds a more intrigue. Plus, the fact that it's like a really nice aqua green contrasts and it pops out against mostly a black and white background, but the concepts here, I think, need to be explored as well. So, for example, the concept of glory. So, and then you have a boxer. So, the sense of fighting for glory is a very indigenous European way, like the idea of Valhalla. This is obviously more Greco-Roman, but that somehow glory is attained through struggle, and then one has. I just think these are interesting concepts to kind of talk about in relationship to the piece. What do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, I have more, I don't have too much that I could break down that would be really poetic in relation to the art. But I mean, European uh, monarchy dates back to the original warlords, the original family line that was
Mm,
able to
okay, yeah.
cement a country in
Mhm.
place. And that's really where royalty comes from. It doesn't come from something arbitrary,
Right,
as
right.
the Jews would say.
Yeah.
And in fact, what's pretty badass about the European way of doing things, if you go back to, well, if you ever wonder why so many people have fawn in their name, which is the royal,
Mhm.
what is it, participle? I screw up. I'm
Yeah.
not a grammarian, but
Right.
um, the reason why so many,
I won't be testing you on it. You won't be graded on this. So.
right? This is an English class. Uh, but the reason why there's so many people with that name is because in World War II, if you won the German equivalent of like our Medal of Honor or Navy Cross,
Okay.
your whole family became nobles. So
Oh,
it's really badass about the Germans.
wow.
So I
That's
think a
nice.
lot of people need to reflect on that, and especially on a day like Juneteenth, which is it's a mockery, and the name itself
Yeah.
is a distortion of grammar. But it's
Right.
also, if you think about the whole like POC thing, like
Yeah.
making people say people of color, that's quite literally what VON in German means, like so and so of such and such surname. So POC is this really twisted, like
Wow.
making you use European language
Ugh.
to refer to
Yeah.
bleeps as
Yeah. It
yeah,
bleep.
yeah, as
Yeah.
royalty basically.
It was well done. I think you've started a trend now, the bleeps.
The
Uh,
bleeps, yeah.
all right, so let's move on here. We got another beautiful piece. Very, again, such a strong sense of graphic design. Hardship is a blessing. Now, that ties right back into the concept about glory and fighting and these kinds of things. And so, to me, I feel that that's moralizing, that is uplifting. It's, yes, I know hardship is not, it's hardship, it's not fun, it's struggle or pain, suffering, something, but at the same time, it's us, it's like a core to our who we are. How did Western civilization come about? Not by just like being nomadic gatherers or something like, we pull together so much. And so this is I kind of a strong piece in terms of like the way that the colors are working. Again, he's got excellent control of his color palette. He's able to use that as a form of contrast. And then like this sort of, photo, how do I put this? Photoshopped photograph, so it doesn't come off the tongue very easily. Using that in contrast to all this kind of like techno type graphic stuff that he collaged in the background, like something you might see on it inside an Iron Man costume or something from Marvel Comics. I don't have a lot to say about this though. It's just a very, very simple piece. It's very enjoyable. I think it would look nice in a frame or something. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I think I don't have too much to say, but it's definitely an exploration of different techniques, the threshold manipulation. It used to be super popular after.
There you go. Right. In Photoshop.
Yeah, Shepard Fairey, or what's his name?
Oh yeah. That's Obey and all that street art that was coming out, I guess, in the early 2000s, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point that you make that point. I think that we need our own Shepard Fairey, and I think that these guys, like in the art right, have something of that kind of street art activism aesthetic. I'm not trying to confirm what the woman said in the article about the right ripping off the left. We're certainly not. I think there's some propaganda elements to his art that comes from World War II. Like I don't know that it specifically is communist or National Socialist propaganda, but it's just design elements that you would see. Anyway,
Shepard Fairey style.
yes,
Yeah, it's very like agitprop Soviet.
right. Well said.
Yeah. What was I had something in mind, but I totally spaced out.
I hate it. Yeah.
I don't want to go off on a tangent, but yeah, it's kind of interesting because alternative politics was in such a different place in that time. And I think a lot of people were introduced. Like what was hot at the time was anarchy and libertarianism. Kind of like early 2000s. I think a lot of people ended up in whatever their third position was from that. But it's kind of interesting seeing all these artists who, under fair weather conditions, when they're celebrated, they're around, and now they're not here and they're not fighting for alternative politics. They're just total vanguard of the establishment. Now, when I was, I'm still pretty young, but like when I was growing up, and the general sentiment was like skepticism toward the government because of the GWAT. Immortal Technique was super popular, but now he's like he's a lackey of the of the DNC basically. But I think a lot of that stuff was just underneath what seemed to be complex was really just racial animosity. It's because even a lot of that old agitprop stuff, it had a lot of this whole outer world uprising theme of like, I'm going to put a woman in a burqa holding a flower in an AK-47 or something.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Right. I know. I mean, I sympathize with anybody who's anti-war. And I know there's a lot of leftists that are anti-war, even though they don't understand that, the people they side with are very, very pro-war, But I guess that's kind of just the fault of their ignorance or their youth or their idealism. And so like that's just an interesting tangent there. But you're making an interesting point to talk about Shepard Fairey, Agitprop, and the rest. Let's take a look at this piece here. I feel that this is hauntingly beautiful. I feel that it's a really, again, I keep trying to go back to saying like, you can't just keep repeating the same old Photoshop filters on sculptures, So this is what I'm highlighting about Waveguy, is that he's highly creative. And for me, this is much more fine art than graphic design. there's obviously a kind of a strong photography quality to it. I feel like there's also a strong narrative quality to it. Something about the the scene that's kind of like projected onto her chest with the water and the woods. I feel that there's a sense of like a journey being taken. The what looks like kind of mountains and like a sunrise or a sunset behind her, implying time, that there's the time is running out, or that maybe it's the dawning of a new time, a new day, something of this. So again, I'm interpreting the work, right? And this is what art is art critique. You give something to the art, you take a chance, you try to understand the symbols presented and the way that they're presented, and then you have an art experience which is enriching. And that is what the left is trying to crush and destroy and demean and scatter to the wind. So we need to partake in this. It's fun to scroll around and here and there and social media, haha, yada yada. But it's also important to stop and kind of like give your heart to the work that our artists in the white positive movement do. So that was a hell of a speech I just gave there. I should get off my soapbox now. Dee, do you want to grab the mic and see what you have to say about this piece?
Yeah, I think you broke it down very well in the note of twilight being on the horizon. I didn't really think about that, and maybe I'm reading into uh, this here because I had a very different interpretation. You were saying like
Oh,
there's a journey, she's looking out,
no, okay.
and there's mountains,
Mhm.
but I actually think that that's you probably have a more accurate interpretation. Maybe it's me being a young guy who's like, here's this inviting woman. Um, but
She's cute. What's her number? No, no, no.
yeah, yeah, she, I, I think it's really cool when artists play with opacity and then see
Mhm.
one part of the
Yes.
image inside of a figure because it's almost like
Mhm.
I was reading into it, not just the mountains, but like there's a hearth or some kind of abode,
Mhm.
and there's this like feminine principle
Mhm.
that's being expressed. So like that's
Mhm.
part of
It's very
who she
mysterious.
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like she's longing for someone.
Mhm. Big time. You can feel that for sure. There's something beautiful in the flowing of her hair. There's a certain motion in the mountains behind her and in the water too, and then a little bit in her clothing. And so there's this strange sense of motion in this picture, even though it's very still. And so this sort of adds to the mystery of the whole thing. The contrast of the dark and the light are pretty strong. There's not a huge amount of mid-range tones in there. So it's like if this were a symphony, what would it sound like? Think of it that way. You know, how would the notes and the tones and the chords and the tempo, how would all of that work? So like I guess I'm having a kinesthetic experience with this piece here. But anyway, very, very, very lovely. So it's nice to jump from like say these fun retro video games to something that's like, sublime actually.
Yeah, I think someone who does art like that very well is Skinless Frank. Have you ever had him on?
Oh my God, you kidding me? Skinless Frank. Yeah, you can't be in this world and not know Skinless Frank. So, granted, the name has always kind of freaked me out. Like,
Yeah.
Frank, get some skin, man. Come on. We're in the program. But like, I think we all know. I think that really deserves its own show.
hmm
I feel as if I reached out to him a long time ago about this. See, the thing is, in the UK, there's such draconian laws, there's such backward anti freedom laws that prevent people, artists, etc., in the UK from communicating, that they have real fears. And it's extremely unfair. And I feel, very hurt and angry about that. So I feel like maybe I can give them a chance to speak through me through this show, and etc. So maybe I'll reach out to him again though. But anyway, let's take a minute to look at this. Maybe I'll let you start. I always start. So would you like to comment a little bit about this piece?
To me, it's kind of giving System Shock vibes. I don't know if you ever played
Mm,
that back in the day. That's a good retro game.
Yeah.
I probably have to think about it more, but there's something cryptic about the layering. I mean, there's, for one, the complex
Hmm.
routes over her,
Hmm.
and the fact that she's not looking at the viewer,
Yeah.
and there's all this, like, layering in the background. Although I think that a part of this is he's evoking her sight, since there's a clearing in
Hmm.
her perspective there.
Hmm. So it's hard to tell. I don't know if I can zoom in on this, but it looks as if like there's a video game screen superimposed over her. Like this would be a hallway right here. This is the edge where the wall meets the floor, and it curves around here. And then there's another wall in front of you where you if somebody went down that hall, they would disappear behind this wall. So you have to kind of look closely to notice that it's that superimposition of ancient and modern technology, and so that kind of leads your eye right up to her temple, where there's a kind of a smashing. It looks as if like it's broken glass, um, but actually it's not broken glass. It's that kind of techno image that's superimposed. So either way, it leads your eye towards her temple, and that is kind of the focal piece of here. So I don't know, for me, that there's something there that it seems like it's really trying to say something about how she thinks and feels. um there's again a lot of graphic design for me. Like, the challenge with graphic design and art is, here's the question: is it just decoration, or does it function conceptually? Is it saying something? You see what I mean? So like certain colors might have certain emotional values that back up a statement, for example. So that's how that would work, like the getting under the hood of art here, so I'm a little, I guess I'm not confused, but this one is harder for me to kind of navigate as far as the meaning of it. I feel like I'm not sure where it's going. I'm just more challenged with it. I can't kind of. I'll need to spend more time with this piece to come up. But if anyone in the audience wants to comment, you guys are welcome to. So we'll move on a little bit here. Not doing anything like usual. That's for sure. There you go with the humor again. I mean, the piece explains itself, and we've already kind of talked through his design philosophy, I guess you could say. His design philosophy with all these kind of textures. I don't know what, like, OS system had, like, say, paint software where you could get certain layers or textures, effects, or what have you. But like just that super bold, slightly gaudy, pink and yellow, peach kind of uh, palette that he's using. I don't know. It adds an element of humor to it.
Yeah, it's very kind of, I don't mean this in a trivializing way, but like Las Vegas, Caesar Palace. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
there's a
it's
bit of that.
definitely, yeah, playing off the idea of what the original intention was, where it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
pondering, or there's some deep significance
Right.
to.
So stepping back then a bit and kind of thinking like, it's just, I guess, essentially modernizing the ancient. It's making the ancient fun and cultural pop culture. Do you see what I'm saying? So like, if the common person knew about, I don't know, Roman history as just a form of pop culture, like the way they might know about Rainbow Six or Destiny, or some popular video game or Marvel Comics movies, like just pop culture conversation. That would really we'd be a whole other culture. You know what I'm saying? Like, to actually know that much about our history.
Right.
So this piece here, again, like this Windows 98. I'm trying to think what operating system that might have been, like 7 or 8 or something. I don't know, but um it's really something. This actually, for me, that this piece bothers me a little bit because of how it's broken, as if like, you know, I mean, I'm just projecting my thoughts, but like, imagine like who would try to smash a sculpture like this?
Hmm.
Like foreign invaders, Muslims, you know what I'm saying? Or like in history, like they would have been. But not all the people that fought with Rome were Muslims. Or they fought the Germanic tribes, et cetera, et cetera. So what's the meaning, or like what's the origin of her face being smashed? I guess that's the first thing that comes to mind. But then it looks as if like through Photoshop and technology, he's kind of mending her or recontextualizing her technically, in such a way as to revitalize her meaning, her beauty, but again through this like technological lens.
Yeah.
So
What's
well,
the um, tool that it's highlighting on the cascading menu?
let me try to zoom in on that. Run. So it's like you press OK and run. So this would be like a little animated short, or maybe a GIF. So that's the idea there. System properties. So, but then what is the pun here? What is the meaning? Run what? Like run the ancient programs again? You know what I'm saying? Like
Hmm.
reinstall Rome into the cultural modem, the cultural computer. Like let's reinstall that program. So that's
Yeah.
a pretty powerful idea. Anything else you want to add to this?
I really like the color palette and how it's
Mm,
balanced.
mm, mm,
And it could definitely be that the the sculpture is fractured or it's like polygonal
mm,
rendering, but there is of course a general theme of like women in despair
mm,
throughout uh, this genre.
mm, mm.
The woman who has to be rescued because she's been injured by present conditions.
That's powerful stuff. All right, let's move on. So this is a lot more like the kind of art that I was talking about earlier, with a general, sculpture, some laser beams, some filters, something like this. Again, there's not like really a lot to say about it. It's a very very standard image, I think, for synthwave. Um, it's a nice piece. It's I don't know. Is there anything you want to add to that?
I don't have much. I think it's one of the better executed ones
Mm,
um, in terms of framing and technical
mhm, mhm.
skill, and it's kind of a recurring motif and
Yeah, yeah.
religious imagery of being in space. It
God
has like,
godlikeness, or if that's a word.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, or like the truest expression of something
Mm,
in its in
mm.
its
Mhm.
isolated space.
Yeah. So any real critique of the career of an artist has to consider the range of work that they've done, from beginning, like when they were young to middle age to old age, and see the entire context of like how they started and where they ended. So if we look at this piece in relationship to all the other pieces, that has an interesting context. So for me, just the simplicity of it kind of makes me think, well, he probably did this earlier on when he was learning Photoshop or something. Maybe not, but like maybe he's sort of searching for himself here, because the palette in that kind of laser frame, it has these kind of fun, colorful relationships, whereas the rest of the piece is sort of dark and monochromatic in a sense. So, but there right away you've got the concept of the contrast, which he does all the time, right? So again, it's a kind of an academic approach to trying to understand an artist, their process. This is the kind of academic stuff that I do sometimes. My teacher side comes out, right? But all right, well let's move on here. Take a look at some more pieces. Man denied itself of heaven, fix it. Interesting. So this is more about like a meme in that sense, where it's kind of like it's not a quote from Mosley or Hitler or somebody that, in history, or Mussolini or something. And I think that, like, the concept is very, very graphic design. It's very much like, man has lost his touch with God, and even the green, the use of the green in Adam here, it seems a bit sickly to me. Uh, I'm not really sure what I think of this graphic device over here. Perhaps it just meant more to lead the eye to, that where the fingers meet, the classic piece here, the Da Vinci piece. That what I do like is the kind of the shadow in the background of the Art Right logo. I think that's a clever, well done thing here. I don't know what's your take on this piece.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. It's kind of hard to chew on. Although I like how it's almost like 2000s DVD screen.
Mm.
You know,
There you
the
go, the
menu screen.
widescreen. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, it almost looks like a commercial not a commercial, but like you might see this in the end of a commercial for a TV screen. But
Hmm.
the idea that they're selling, or he is selling here, is this idea of like, fix our relationship, reconnect us to heaven. And then check that out, like, smash your TV so that you can reconnect naturally, through nature or meditation or self, community, love, art, culture. So, like, I think that, for me, I think that is my interpretation of
Yeah, it's probably better better than I could do in terms of
this. Okay.
comprehending it.
All right, and then this, again, like, strong graphic design. This feels very much like a CD cover to, like, I don't know, like some good music,
Hmm.
maybe George Floyd and Donald Kent, "Some Days Today" or something like that. Um, that's one of my songs. Okay, so consume or die. There must be more to life than this, right? So consume or die. That's it's almost, the woman almost looks robotic. She almost has this transhuman kind of quality about her because of the filter that's laid over her, the use of the color and the graphics, as if she is a product to consume almost, which is very dehumanizing.
Hmm.
Um, what's your take on this piece here?
Yeah, it's a little more 90s with the white scape in the background and the bloom. And
Hmm.
obviously there was so much uh, playing up of the chanteuse, or the female muse in the
Mm,
90s for whatever reason.
mm,
It's kind of like a little bit
hmm.
what I said Aeon Flux, but what's the other film?
Well,
It's
I keep thinking of Simply Irresistible, the '80s video with the
yeah.
girls and the light in their face, and they all have the dress the same, and their hair slicked back, because the background, I think, was just like a plain white, and then her lipstick is so strong. I guess I'm a little more mired in the '80s.
Right, yeah, it definitely reflects the generational bias where it's like it reminds me of the night you're thinking,
Right, which
and
is natural. That's a natural thing.
because there's what was it? This kind of theme. What's that movie with? I'm totally spacing out, but with Jared Leto. Sorry, Jared Leto,
Yeah,
and
well, which has been in a lot of movies.
the one about drugs, and it
Oh,
has
right. It's slipping my mind. I can see it in my mind right now, but it's something about life or other.
yeah, it reminds me kind of of that.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I get it. I get it. That I don't know what to call that, but I do get what you're talking about. It's almost the aesthetic of that film, actually. Uh,
Hmm.
so here's an interesting concept: the selling of ideas, the marketing of ideas, the graphic design to sell ideas. So the way that the logo Art Right is positioned, it so you have consumer die. There must be more to life. Art Right. It's really concise. It's very, very, very strong. My only critique is maybe to make it larger. you know, like not, don't cover her lips or anything, but I think you've got space on either side of her shoulder and neck over here that the entire thing could have been larger.
Yeah.
It's a powerful concept. Also, the use of the different fonts looks that's an important contrast because, like, consume or die. Well, that's obviously not what we're selling, or that idea that we agree with. There must be more to life, right? So this is a again, like, these pieces, they hit very directly, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is more of his humor. Fuck triangles, be a square. Um, that just that whole hip to be square thing is kind of got me in a Patrick Bates mode right now. I don't know if anyone's getting the references from the song "Hip to Be Square." And anyway, not a lot to say. I kind of don't feel like this is a really sophisticated piece. I think it's more like a meme. I'll pop off to here again. More of that humor and fun. The pop culture quality, not terribly sophisticated. There's, of course, this is almost like canon right here. Like, these are the rules of, you have the main character. Now this almost looks like AI art, though. What would you say?
Yeah, it's a little bit more lighthearted again with, juxtaposing something like sunglasses on an epic hero.
Yeah, but in a way, though, doesn't that help the average white boy summer guy identify with that spirit, and give him a Chad kind of feeling, So,
Right.
like, that again, like, that'd be a cool sticker to put somewhere in your room or on your guitar case, or whatever it is. Like, it's just got a fun, good graphic quality to it. This piece I like more. Me being like a frustrated filmmaker, I love things that look like film stills, and that it almost has a sort of a motion to it. You want to click play, and see what happens, and then that kind of 80s VHS glitchiness to it is pretty cool. He really looks like a superhero to me, like his position, the shading. Um, I don't know. It's a nice piece. I personally am not a huge, like, 80s nostalgia guy. I don't have a. To me, I look at, like, the 50s as much more idealistic in terms of, like, what the white identity movement should idealize. Like, that is way more nationalistic, and all of those core principles that I was talking about: God, family, nation. Um, Maybe it's a bit of a fantasy, though, right? Because how naive people were, say, from then to now. But at the same time, I don't consider that escapism. I consider inspiration. So know the difference. All right,
Hmm.
giving you the mic here. What's your impression of this piece?
Yeah, I think when you filter over something, I mean, this is obviously a bit of a filter, like they're derezzing it and obfuscating what the
Mhm.
image today would be. There's more left to the imagination, and I think there were more effects used in that
Mhm.
style in the past,
Mhm.
and I think it added a little bit more to the concepts.
Mhm.
Like there were, you might see kind of like B-roll footage or montage footage in older films where they use this type of
Mhm.
they'll use like VHS footage to make it look gritty, or CCTV
Yeah, yeah.
stuff to make it look gritty. But I think it's part of the reason why people like it is because just arbitrarily making something super high resolution doesn't necessarily like make it better, better art.
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, it's interesting. I somehow or other, the filter, the VHS filter, and the image and the lighting all work together in a very powerful way. So that now compare that to this piece. Now, if we zoom way in, you're going to see that the light parts are actually articles. They're like internet articles that he blurred a little bit, but he uses, like, imagine if you had a paintbrush, and when you hit the canvas, instead of a blob of paint, a stroke of paint, you would see like a news article come out. So that's kind of how he's using this. For me, I feel like that's quite sophisticated. It has a very like Matrix green code look to it. Do you know what I'm referring to? Like, you know,
Oh
the
yeah.
Matrix. Of course, the choice of the color. He probably intended that. I would say that's maybe a fair bet.
Hmm.
Um, it's just now to me, this is far more sophisticated than some of the funny stuff, you know, where he's using information as a kind of painterly quality. So he's really beautifully merging digital art with fine art. And that's not to say that digital art cannot be fine art, but it's imitating fine art in a much more aesthetically pleasing way. So like I'm quite plus the moodiness of this. Like I love that kind of Sigma male, Ryan Gosling, you know, Blade Runner kind of like
Hmm.
sad guy aesthetic. Like that's totally me, you know, that's literally me. Um, but anyway, I'll hand the mic off to you. What are your thoughts and feelings on this piece?
Yeah, I was gonna say Matrix, and then in a lot of concept art, decades prior, you would see stuff like this where it's almost like someone's down in a hole or some sort of like alcove. I don't know how to describe it, but that was like really popular kind of lighting in some concept art for like movies and games. And
For sure, I know what you're referring to. Yeah,
yeah, like it's so hard to put your finger on, like, because it doesn't have a title,
yeah,
like what you would call that style. But like
right,
I
right.
used to collect concept art books
Oh,
on
cool.
movies and games, and
Oh, that's
like you would
awesome.
see, yeah, like the old fables type art, or what was
Great
another
stuff.
game, like Indigo Prophecy was another one,
Mhm,
Fahrenheit,
mhm.
like that. I don't know how to describe it, but there's almost something like mystic or spiritual about, they're in this like confined space, and
Right,
they'll
right.
use like motion blur a lot, and it's kind of a
Mhm.
little bit blurred.
Well, there's a bit of blur used in this as well, and it helps to create like the background specifically. It gives a spatial relationship because if you take a photograph, you're focused on the foreground, the background's going to be a little fuzzy, you know. So it has like a nice little effect there. Um, but yeah, this is it. I guess again, if I were to go into this and try to interpret it, the idea of man made of information, that man made of media, you know, that like it's part of him and all around him. There's something kind of dark about that, you know, you try to think in the whole history of humanity. Technology hit us in like 100 years, like, you know, like look at where we went from 100 years ago to now, and how much has been thrust on man and on humanity, and like our inability to cope with how fast technology is changing, you know, reject modernity and reject the modern world, this kind of stuff, return to tradition, not feeling like homesick for a world that I didn't know exist. I feel that it's the postmodernism of the technological age, the information age. There's a type of existential angst that modern man just takes for granted. It's just like it's just the water we swim in, you know, and it's just the context we live in. We take it for granted per se. But I'm musing here. I don't know what could you bring me back to earth?
Yeah, no worries. Because it is dark, but then there's also this weird comfort in a lot of that old school portrayal of darkness, because there's this like subterranean
Hmm.
theme going on, or like
Yeah.
being able to hide in the information, like the information
Ah,
is so dense that you have
wow,
like a kind of solace in that.
wow.
And I think that there's like the point in the Matrix film where Neo sees all
Hmm.
that code falling,
Yes,
and it's
yes.
like an overlay.
Wow.
It's like the skin on top of everything
Right.
in its
Fall.
expression.
Yeah.
He's seeing the world. That's like when he gets truly powerful, is when he sees the world for what it is.
Truly red pilled, you know.
Yeah. So there's something going on there. But like
It's as
I
if
would,
like
yeah.
he became enlightened at that moment and he saw, just the code of reality, which is almost a supernatural experience, So
Mm-hmm.
I'm really glad you brought that up. I think that it would be foolish not to tie the Matrix into one's interpretation of this piece, So let's move on. What do we got? Okay, I think it's looking to me like we've covered everything that I had set aside for the show. So that, and we're going a bit past an hour and a half. So I usually do like about an hour, and I don't know if do you have any kind of concluding thoughts on the whole context of like the way the left talks about our art versus our view of it.
It's a pretty vast subject, but I
Mm,
think that actually like simplicity works best
mm,
because some of the better,
mm,
um, yeah, simplicity,
mm.
even on a technical level.
Yeah,
Some pieces where I'm like, but then again, it's like if it's too good and if it's too self-serious,
yeah,
it's easier to rip it down and be like, oh, like look at these guys, they're trying to,
yeah.
you know, throw up all these posters, and it's much more obvious.
Hmm.
Um, but no, I think we really hit a stride on some of these, pop cultural references. I think it would be awesome, like
Yeah.
if you and I could talk about some of these ideas instead of just trying to like type it out in really intellectual academic prose, or get Jefferson Lee on.
Oh
That'd
God,
be
yeah.
really cool because I have a whole list of
Oh,
subjects where I'm like, we need to go into this. Like one of the
really?
funniest.
Dude, that,
Yeah,
that could be a whole new show. I'd be all about that, man. I mean, I don't know if you want to do it on his channel or my channel. I can't, presume to take his channel, but like, I would totally love to do this. I think this would be a blast. Can you give me an idea about one of the topics that you have in mind?
sure. Yeah. So this is really funny, but like, so in the 90s, um, I don't know if you noticed this, but like before we had the, I got to be careful with the words that I use. I'll use a more like uh, softball term here, but like
Okay.
before we had the Creole goddess in media everywhere, like frizzy hair girl
Nice.
everywhere. I don't know if you noticed this, but it was like Hapa girls were really big in the 90s. Like that was a big part of everything. Like
Oh,
the whole Final Fantasy Spirit Within,
okay.
and then
Right.
Daria with
Yeah.
her friend. Like they always had to insert the like Asian chick, which I'm not like malicious about, but I
Mm,
do wonder like from a cultural breakdown. I know it sounds kind of pedantic and goofy, but it's like the East was exporting a lot of culture, and I think
mm-hmm,
that there was Eastern and Western youth.
mm-hmm.
There's a massive youth culture that was being shared, and I just
Yeah.
find little snippets of that so.
So, like this, I lived in Asia for 5 years and all of that stuff. Like everybody knows, I've got this massive Asia connection.
Right.
So, like, I have huge amounts that I can talk about. But I think the very first thing that we all recognize is the manga anime crossover somehow or other. I think it's just a generational thing. Everybody that I've ever asked, like, why do you like manga? Why do you like anime? And the answer is usually, I grew up with it. And so, there was this, yeah, it's a, that media came into our pop culture. And I think that it's just parallel with all of this nostalgia for the past. It's parallel with the notion of simplicity, purity. And Japan is an extremely excellent example of an ethno-nationalist state. You see what I'm saying? So, like, you
Mm-hmm.
know, I personally am not a fan of anime and manga, even though I lived in Japan for a year, worked for a Japanese corporation for 2 years in New York City, blah, blah, blah. No malice at all, obviously, for the culture. But it's just, I'm an American comics guy. You know what I mean? Like, that's who I am. And I'm always kind of like, we should be, teaching our kids about how, all of our traditions, not what's going on in Japan. So, like, there's an ethnic or ethno-nationalist debate to be had there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure a lot of people get heated about it, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because I don't approach it with like malice. And it's something where I think like it's so obvious So it makes you wonder, like, what was the intention, or was there really so much of an agenda? Because there's a lot of Asian fusion aesthetics, and that was like a popular trend in architecture, even, or like home decor, and a lot of like musical artists that were being promoted, like, who are, I don't use the word half, but like derogatorily. I'm using it like on a technical level, and it's an endearing meme to me. But that was like very much a thing, especially if you're a 90s kid. Because I'm like, there seems to be these muses that come along each generation. Like there was the whole multiple musicians like Boa and Bjork, and you know what I mean? It's kind of this weird like 90s thing.
That's interesting. I keep coming back to this idea about how our culture, our right-wing dissident right culture, has all of these kind of like fun pockets to it, you know, like stuff like you're talking the video games, anime, this like a lot of the attitude that we the GM, good morning Pepe Apu's, you know, all of that stuff. There's a wholesomeness, even though we can really fight and tear each other down, and there's a lot of infighting and egos and, you know, big brains. You know, only so many, like only one tiger can live on the mountain kind of deal. There's a lot of that. But in the next morning, hey, good morning, you know, Apu, and you're like,
yeah.
I just feel like it's important that we're still in touch with our youth, and, you know, the youthful spirit. Doesn't matter how old you are physically. You must be mentally, spiritually, emotionally, cognitively, you know, rooted in who you are, you know, who you were born as, not this kind of like, you know, postmodern fucking zombie, you know. But yeah, there's a lot of fascinating directions we can go. I think that since this is your idea, maybe you can reach out to Jefferson Lee, or we could do a email or something or other. You know, I can reach out to him.
Sure. It'd be very funny to contact him and be like, hey, you don't know me. Like I kind of
hung out
with Josh a little. Do you want to do
No,
a
let me.
podcast on,
Okay,
like,
in that
Happy
case,
Girls?
let me contact Jefferson. But actually, I've already talked to Josh Neal about coming on in August. He's just busy this summer, so like he's going to be back in. So who knows? You know, it could be like a little old party or something like that.
Yeah.
Very good. So, any last closing words here? I think we've done quite a good job, you know, with the art critique.
Yeah, I think we really filled it out.
Cool. I have to say, I do hope someday that somebody critiques my art with as rigorously as I am. You know, it means a lot to me that you bought my book, Imperium Calling. The link to the book is on Amazon. It's in the show notes. If you'd like to pick up a copy, grab one. I will continue with art-related content at this channel, and it looks like we'll have some more fun, interesting conversations with Mr. D. Morehouse. So thank you, my friend. I really appreciate your coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Okay, good night, everybody.